Senator Ossoff, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us today. Nice to see you again. I'll talk about fire safety for a moment. The Senate is currently considering reauthorization of critical fire safety grant program that is administered by DHS and FEMA. Among the legislation that's moving toward the floor, the Assistance to Firefighters Grant Program and the SAFER program, and the chairman has done outstanding work shepherding that legislation through this committee. I was in Columbus, Georgia, a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Secretary, meeting with Chief Scarpa and his team of firefighters there and talking about how they've relied upon assistance to firefighter grants and federal support to ensure the health and safety of their firefighters and paramedics and to ensure that timely emergency response can be deployed into the community when families' lives are at risk and businesses are at risk of catastrophic damage to property. And one of the issues that was raised to me, and I'm sure you've heard this before, is that for smaller localities and jurisdictions, the process of applying for these assistance to firefighter grants can be onerous and intimidating. It's a difficult and lengthy process. And as you know, Mr. Secretary, it's oftentimes these smaller localities and less well-resourced jurisdictions that most urgently need that kind of help. So I'd like for your team to connect with mine and see if we can work together. It may not even require any legislation to look at how this program can be administered so that smaller localities with less resources, who don't have full-time permanent grant writing staffs, can nevertheless compete for these federal funds. Can we work together on that?
Most certainly, Senator, and I should say that this issue that you raise is something that we are already focused on across the entire spectrum of our grant programs. Organizations, whether it be in the nonprofit security grant program or firefighters, the smaller departments that don't necessarily have the resources to hire a grant applicant, we have to make sure that our grant programs are simple and accessible so that we achieve fairness in the distribution of those funds. I look forward to working with you on this.
Well, you bring to mind something that I think you could do at this hearing that would be really constructive. So you know, Mr. Secretary, that last year we had a wave of threats targeting historically black colleges and universities in Georgia and across the country. In Georgia, in the last few months, we've seen a shocking increase in anti-Semitic incidents. The front yards of Jews in Dunwoody and in Athens, hateful pamphlets, threats on the phone. Now, the DHS runs certain programs and creates opportunities, nonprofit security grants, for example, for houses of worship and for institutions of higher education to access funds and resources and information to help them stay safe. So I'm going to send this clip to the folks at faith-based institutions and educational institutions in Georgia. Can you just explain to them right now what resources the department makes available to them?
Yes, so there are multiple. One, we have a nonprofit security grant program which funds organizations to assist them in securing their facilities for the very reason that you described, Senator. I have actually convened a faith-based security advisory council to advise us on the needs of faith-based organizations with respect to their safety and security because of the rise in hate in this country, whether it be bomb threats against historically black colleges and universities, or whether it be acts of anti-Semitism or other forms of hate. We've seen a number of different strains of hate and their connectivity to violence, which is where we really become engaged, only, and sadly and tragically, increase in the United States. We also share best practices as to how organizations can become more secure and safer without becoming less welcoming for their congregations and their communities. I think following the bomb threats, if I may, following the bomb threats against historically black colleges and universities, I convened the presidents of the HBCUs to discuss the issue of safety and security with them. If I'm not mistaken, Senator, for the first time, 2 historically black colleges and universities are recipients of the nonprofit security grant program. This is an area of intense focus of ours for the reasons you identify.
Well, that's encouraging because I know that something you and I had discussed previously was improving the outreach and consistency of outreach to HBCUs so they could avail themselves of these opportunities. Mr. Secretary, last May during a hearing on the southern border, I questioned Assistant Secretary Contreras at the Department of Health and Human Services on the humane treatment of migrant children in HHS custody. My question for you is, when unaccompanied migrant children are encountered by CBP before transfer to HHS custody, how is the department ensuring that the facilities where they stay and the treatment that they receive is safe, humane, and takes into account the unique needs of unaccompanied minors?
Allow me to share with you, Senator, that our Border Patrol agents do nothing short of heroic work in fulfilling their responsibilities along the border under tremendous challenge, a challenge that has been the subject of much of the questioning of me today. It is a challenge that we are working tirelessly to meet successfully. We are very focused on the safety and well-being of the individuals who come into our custody, and that, of course, includes unaccompanied children. I have said before that a Border Patrol station is no place for a child to remain for any length of time. We are very focused on abiding by our legal obligation to transfer an unaccompanied child from our custody into the care of Health and Human Services within 72 hours. Our personnel do extraordinary work in addressing the needs of those children while they are in our custody and moving them safely to HHS for ultimate disposition.
What challenges are you trying to address that concern you about this process and the safe, responsible stewardship of unaccompanied minors who are in CBP custody or control during that period?
Senator, actually, what we need to do, and what we are doing is building lawful, safe, and orderly pathways so that individuals do not need to place their lives, their well-being, in the hands of unscrupulous, ruthless smuggling organizations, so that parents who are desperate for relief do not place their children in the hands of those smugglers in an effort to achieve safety. We need to build lawful pathways, which is what we are doing.
Forgive me, Mr. Secretary, I agree with you, but I'm running out of time here. So my question is, what are the specific concerns or challenges that you worry about operationally when you think about the care and safety of these children when they're in DHS custody?
Senator, the vulnerability of the children themselves, the conditions within the Border Patrol stations. The Border Patrol stations were not designed for the care of unaccompanied children. The requisite level of staffing, which is why we sought and thankfully received more staffing resources in fiscal year 2023, and why we are seeking more resources in fiscal year 2024. We need to modernize our Border Patrol facilities, and thanks to infrastructure funding, we have it for the first time in any meaningful way. These are some of the things that concern us. We need more transportation resources, more personnel, better facilities. These are some of the challenges that we face, and yet amidst those challenges, our personnel do extraordinary work.
Thank you for the specifics. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.